Holiday party at Ironhorse's Houston yard. Music, beer, diesel in the air. Then the room snapped quiet. Chad Thorne, slick suit, my wife's boss, slid a greasy arm around Linda and planted a kiss so wet it echoed off the pallets. Men who've hauled through blizzards stared at their boots. My gift to the company, a working V8 I built by hand, sat on a table like scrap. I didn't swing. I learned a long time ago you don't hit a man at the noise. You wait for the silence. Name's Jack Walker. I built Ironhorse bolt by bolt, then stepped aside when Big Hank died. His boy thinks the yard belongs to him. He doesn't know about the paper his father signed or what $1 can buy at dawn. Tonight he humiliated me. Tomorrow he meets the road's only rule: respect it or it runs you over. If you want to know how a kiss cost a king his crown, stay. I started with a '95 Chevy Silverado, paint sun-faded, seat foam showing through like a busted elbow. The heater worked when it felt like it, and the radio only caught 2 stations: preacher at dawn, country at night. I hauled what folks needed: pallets of dog food, roofing shingles, farm feed, nothing fancy. Cash was thin, but pride was thick. I kept a shoebox ledger under the seat and a photo of my old man taped to the dash. Son, keep it between the lines. I learned routes by smell: cedar mills, catfish farms, diesel and wet asphalt after a Texas rain. Nights were long, coffee was cheap, and every delivery earned a handshake that mattered more than the check. People tried to talk me out of it. Too hard, too risky. Maybe. But the road answered me like a hymn. By winter, I knew one truth: if I could keep this truck alive, maybe I could build something bigger. And then came the first call. The call was from a man named Miguel, who needed 6 emergency loads moved by sunrise. My Chevy couldn't carry it all. I phoned 2 buddies from a job site, Big Mike and Curtis, men with strong backs and straighter eyes. We caravanned through the night, headlights stitching white thread across black highway. Nobody asked for contracts. A handshake settled it. We hitched, strapped, and ran. When we backed those trailers into Miguel's dock at 5:47 a.m., he hugged us like family. He paid in cash and breakfast tacos. Word traveled through diners and yards: call Jack, he shows up. Soon the 3 of us were 5, then 8. We shared tools, routes, and sorrow, like when Curtis's mom fell sick and the whole crew covered his runs. We were rough men who'd shovel your driveway and lend you a socket set before you finished asking. That winter, the yard felt like a small church: no stained glass, just chrome. And every truck, a pew. We weren't a company yet. We were a promise. We met Henry Thorne, Big Hank, outside a feed mill that smelled like sweet grain and axle grease. He stepped out of a square-shouldered Kenworth, shook my hand, and looked me square in the soul. You the one folks say always shows up? I nodded. He grinned. Good. I need men who don't flinch. Hank had a voice like gravel in a coffee can and rules like fence posts. No cheating, no cutting corners, no leaving a man behind. He watched us load, checked our straps, asked about fuel costs, then surprised me. Jack, you ever think bigger? I told him bigger is just more ways to fail if you don't do small things right. He patted the Kenworth fender like a faithful dog. Bigger is just more people to protect, son. He gave us overflow runs when his fleet was full, paid fair, and never late. End of that month, he invited me into his office. The walls smelled like cedar and diesel. On his desk lay a blank contract. Hank didn't hire us. He tested us. Late freeze, icy bridges, 1-lane hill country road. He called, we rolled. Big Mike chained up a stuck rig in sleet while I spotted with a flashlight between my teeth. We were numb and laughing. Hank watched, hands in pockets, the way a father watches boys grow into men. Between runs, he'd fry bacon in a warehouse skillet and tell stories about the early days. Homemade ramps, bank loans he paid in quarters. He taught me to look a man in the eye when you're wrong, and look twice when a deal seems too sweet. We celebrated little wins: new tarp, clean DOT inspection, a driver home by his kid's game. When Curtis lost his mother, Hank closed the yard for an hour and stood beside us at the funeral, hat over heart. That day I understood what we were building. Not trucks, not freight, a brotherhood. Hank poured coffee into my thermos and murmured, "You're not done, Jack." He was right. We'd barely begun. Linda and I met in a borrowed apartment with mismatched chairs and a stove that ran too hot. We ate chili from one pot, laughed at jokes that weren't that funny, and counted change in a mason jar for gas. She loved that I smelled like cedar and road dust. She rode shotgun on weekends, feet on the dash, drawing logos in her notebook while I talked miles and margins. We had a rule: never lie to each other, even when the truth stings. She taped a handwritten note to my dash: "Bring it home safe." When my engine coughed on a Sunday and I missed church, she said, "Keep the faith on Monday." She ironed my one good shirt for a bank meeting, and when the loan officer smirked at our balance sheet, she squeezed my hand until the doubt left. "We're builders," she whispered. For a while, we were. We traded luxury for purpose and thought we'd gotten rich. Maybe we did, just not the kind you put in a bank. The logo came to me on a rain delay. Linda sketched while I traced with a shop pencil on cardboard. A charging iron horse, head down, shoulders square. It wasn't about speed, it was about will. We slapped the first decal on a trailer that still had another company's shadow beneath it. The name felt heavy in the mouth, Ironhorse Logistics, and right in the bones. We cleaned up a gravel lot, strung work lights, built a tiny break room with a coffee pot that never slept. I bought a used lift, Big Mike painted safety lines, and we mounted a brass bell near the door. Every on-time delivery, we rang that bell. Neighbors complained it was loud. "Good," I said. "Let the neighborhood hear what pride sounds like." The first time a customer sent a thank you pie, we put it in the fridge and nobody touched it until everyone got a slice. We weren't chasing a scoreboard. We were building a standard. That bell would ring a lot louder soon. Hank called me into his office on a quiet afternoon. Sun poured through dusty blinds, striping the desk like a flag. He coughed twice, dry and mean. I knew then the man was carrying a weight you can't shrug off. "Jack," he said, "if something happens to me, my boy will inherit. He's book smart, not road strong." He slid a document across, a buyback clause no one else knew about. If the company ever got mismanaged, I could reclaim it for $1. "Not for greed," he added, "for stewardship." I stared at that inch of paper like it was a mile of highway. "Why me?" He tapped my knuckles. "Because you show up." We signed, notarized, sealed it in a folder marked routine. On the way out, he paused by the bell and gave it a soft ring. "For later," he smiled. I tucked a crisp $1 in my wallet that day, like a quiet promise to an old friend. I prayed I'd never need it. We don't always get what we pray for. The doctors said stress in gentle voices that made it sound smaller than it felt. My chest hurt like a lug nut over-tightened. Hank's cough got worse. We sat on the tailgate, boots swinging, and decided the thing neither of us wanted. I'd sell my stake, step back, let the machine run without my hands on the wrench. "It's still yours in the ways that matter," Hank said. We shook on it the way men do when they're saying goodbye but pretending they aren't. I told the crew I needed rest, time with Linda, fewer midnights, more mornings. They clapped my back and said they'd keep the flame. For a few months I did quieter things, fixed a porch light, cooked eggs without shells, built a Model V8 on my workbench, one tiny piston at a time. It felt good and wrong at the same time, like leaving a campfire burning when you're the last one awake. Then Hank was gone. The yard sounded different after that. Same bell, thinner echo. Chad came home in a sharp suit with soft hands. He talked about efficiencies and platform plays, which is fine in a boardroom but thin on black ice. He smiled like a salesman and shook hands like a man already checking his watch. The crew tried to teach him the yard's language, gestures, glances, the way a driver's eyes dull when he's too tired to be safe. He replaced coffee cans of spare bolts with laminated posters and blamed operator error when a retread blew. Linda liked his polish. I noticed. We all noticed. He praised apps and ignored axle weights. I kept quiet, hoping he'd find a spine. Then he cut quality to chase margins, and a man named Earl almost didn't make it home. You don't forget the look a driver's wife gives you when she's counting miracles. I went home, sat in my garage, and listened to that little model engine tick. It sounded steady. The yard did not. A prince was on the throne. The kingdom was wobbling. Chad liked to say, Data doesn't lie, while never touching a ratchet. He'd sweep into the yard with a tablet like it was a badge, asking why grease buckets weren't color-coded. I said, because a man's hands know the difference. He smirked. He ran meetings with charts that looked pretty and told us to shave minutes off routes without asking about the dead end on Turner Lane or the one bridge that ices first every winter. Older drivers, men who taught their sons to back a trailer with mirrors only, sat quiet, hats in their laps, watching a boy rewrite a language he couldn't speak. I tried to translate. Chad, a truck's not a cell phone. You can't swipe away a wobble. He asked me to stay in my lane, which is funny when you've lived your life between white lines. The day he priced tires like apples, I felt the ground shift. You can't fix arrogance with a spreadsheet, but you can measure the damage. And it was coming fast. Our house isn't big, but lately it felt like two towns connected by bad roads. Linda's coffee went from good morning to, it's on the counter. She said I carried the yard home, and maybe I did, the smell of diesel, the noise in my head. She asked why I kept defending old ways. I told her old ways kept men alive in the rain. She rolled her eyes, said Chad was pushing forward, and didn't notice my hands tighten. She started dressing like every day was an interview, and I pretended not to see. We used to count change in a mason jar. Now she counted likes on company posts. When I talked about Earl's near miss on a mountain grade last winter, she said, "Jack, you worry too much." Maybe. Or maybe I could hear the truck before the wreck. The night she came home humming a tune from the office party I didn't attend, I turned off the garage light and just sat in the dark, listening for a sign. I built the Model V8 because my hands needed truth. Tiny pistons, polished valves, a crank that turned smooth as a prayer. I cut my thumb once, bled on the block, wiped it clean, and kept going. The radio murmured old country while the parts learned how to be a heart. Every night after supper, I'd disappear to the bench, lining pieces on a shop rag like soldiers. Big Mike dropped by and said, "That thing gonna run?" I said, "It already does, up here," and tapped my chest. The model wasn't for show. It was a reminder. Real engines are honest. If something's wrong, they tell you. They rattle, knock, smoke. People, they hide misfires behind shiny covers. When the cam finally seated right and the little engine purred, I thought about Ironhorse, how it used to sound steady. I boxed the model in red velvet for the company's 10th anniversary. A tribute, a warning, maybe both. I had no idea how loud that little heart would beat when the time came. Bad news doesn't shout at first. It whispers, then it stacks. Earl stopped by with a tire shard sharp as a broken promise. "Came off a brand new retread, Jack." Big Mike said oil drums were running thin, like cheaper blends. Curtis reported 2 check engine lights after a discount service. Each story alone is a shrug. Together, they're a siren. I walked the yard at dusk, listening like I used to listen for my kids breathing after a fever. Trucks talk if you let them. You can hear worry in a vibration and fatigue in the way a door slams. The new purchasing guy bragged about cost savings, and I asked him which highway he drove last winter. He blinked, said he works remote. I nodded, because what else can you do? Later that night, I wrote down every complaint in a cheap notebook. Pages filled up like the sky before hail. When men who never complain start using words like unsafe, you don't wait for approval. You get ready. Earl is steady as a metronome and twice as patient. He doesn't speed, doesn't pass on a blind curve, doesn't gamble. That's why the call hit hard. "Blowout on Highway 32, Big Mike said, voice flat, the way men get when they're holding in fear. By the time I reached the shoulder, the sun was hard and the wind smelled burnt. The trailer leaned ugly, rubber flayed open like an old rope. Earl stood there with his arm wrapped, eyes clear but far away. He said, "Thought I was done, Jack." That road has a drop-off that takes no prisoners. I pictured his wife at the table counting blessings and what-ifs. Safety isn't a line item. It's a promise you make to a family you may never meet. The tire vendor swore those retreads were within spec. My jaw hurt from biting back what I wanted to say. Instead, I picked up a strip of rubber and slid it into my pocket. The hill kept its secret. I did not. A memo went out the next morning. Operator error contributed to incident. I read it twice like maybe the words would change. Earl wore that memo like a bruise he couldn't cover. Men who've kept rigs upright in black ice know what they know. To see a suit blame a driver from a warm chair, that's a special kind of cheap. I asked for the maintenance logs, the purchase orders, the test results. The office sent me a slideshow with stock photos of happy trucks. I printed it anyway and set it next to the tire shard on my bench. Linda said the company had to protect itself. I said the company is the men. We argued in circles that didn't lead home. Earl came by to thank me for having his back, and I realized how low the bar had dropped. A good man almost died, and the conversation was about paperwork. That night I prayed the simplest prayer I know. Lord, light up what's hidden. He did. Not yet, but soon. You can't track morale on a dashboard. You hear it in smaller laughs, longer silences, coffee left cold. Guys stopped ringing the bell after on-time runs, not in protest, just because joy had slipped a gear. One afternoon I watched a new driver stare at a strap for a full minute, as if courage was something you had to prime. I walked over, tightened it, told him a story about my first load of roofing nails and the storm I outran by a minute. He smiled, then asked if the rumors were true. Cheap parts, cut corners. I could have lied. I didn't. We're fixing it, I said, believing I would even if the people in charge wouldn't. Older men started talking about retirement not like a plan, but like a surrender. That scared me more than any spreadsheet. A company can replace a truck. It can't replace a man's faith in the patch on his jacket. When faith fails, bolts back out. I went home and opened the notebook. It was almost full. Chad unveiled a digital strategy, like it was a moon landing. There were logos, slogans, a glossy video with smiling drivers touching screens. The app could do everything, apparently, except steer on black ice, check a bead seat on a cheap tire, or notice a man's hands shaking after 12 hours. He said customers could order direct, track freight, rate drivers like they were takeout. I asked if it could flag a retread with weak sidewalls. He blinked, said, "Quality control is a separate initiative." Men coughed into their sleeves so they wouldn't laugh, or worse. Older folks watching this know the feeling. Someone half your age explaining your life back to you with buzzwords. I wanted to root for him. I did. But he kept solving the parts that weren't broken. After the meeting, Big Mike muttered, "New paint on a cracked frame." I told him frames can be welded. He said, "Not if the welder's the one swinging the hammer." The room smelled like fresh coffee and old doubt. I noticed Linda's schedule aligning with Chad's like map lines. Early meetings, late debriefs. I told myself it was the season, holidays, year-end push. She said he listened, that he saw her value. I said I did too. She said, "Do you?" We sat at the dinner table, the old mason jar now full of loose screws for the porch project I hadn't finished. Her phone lit up with a message. She flipped it over, face down. People our age know that move. It's not always guilt. Sometimes it's just a door closing. I took a breath, counted fork taps, and talked about Earl's kids and the company picnic next summer like the future was certain. She said, "Maybe take a break from all that yard drama." I said the yard is where my people are. Truth is, I felt something I hate. Jealousy mixed with dread. I'd rather change a clutch in a gravel lot at midnight than feel that again. I cleaned the kitchen in silence. The phone stayed face down. They called my name at the holiday party, bright lights bouncing off steel beams. I didn't plan to speak. I planned to clap, smile, place that little V8 on the table, and fade into the crowd. Chad had other plans. He wrapped an arm around Linda, called her our star, handed her a giant check, and poured honey on words that weren't his to claim. Then he joked about my gift, scrap metal with feelings, and folks laughed who should have known better. When he kissed her, long and loud, men I'd bled with stared at the floor. Big Mike crushed a can until it cut his palm. I kept my hands open. That's the trick older men learn. You hold your fire until it's time. I picked up the mic and said, "Congratulations," in a voice I barely recognized. Then I set the V8 on the table, red velvet bright as a brake light in fog, and walked off stage. The warehouse was silent. In that quiet, I finally heard it. Dawn coming. Chad lifted my velvet box like it was a joke someone dared him to tell. He flipped the lid, glanced at the model V8, and smirked. "Scrap metal with feelings," he said, loud enough to reach the rafters. Laughter bounced off steel beams. I watched a kid in a fresh company jacket laugh along, then look at me and swallow it back. That engine wasn't decor. It was 6 months of nights, skin on steel, a heartbeat you could see. Linda stood 10 feet away, hands clasped, eyes on the floor. She didn't say a word. It's funny what sticks, how the light hit the red velvet, how the bell by the door didn't ring once. Big Mike shifted his weight like a bull nudged by a fence post. I felt heat crawl up my neck, then cool air slide down my spine. The older you get, the more you learn to let the first punch pass. I set my jaw and counted to 8, like tightening lug nuts in a star pattern. Then he kissed her. He did it slow, like a dare, and the sound of it traveled, wet, careless, final. Careless. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks hovered. Men stared at the concrete, at their boots, at anything but me. Linda stumbled, then steadied. She didn't push him away. A younger man might have swung. An older man knows what he stands to lose. Freedom, leverage, the chance to fix the real problem. I took a breath, let the beer fizz out in my hand, and set the can on a table that wobbled. Big Mike's can crumpled until it bit his palm. He didn't flinch. "Say the word," he whispered. "Not yet. You don't jump the gun at mile marker 20 when the finish line is at 50. I stepped off the stage. The gift sat there, bright and small, heart on display. My name was announced again. I kept walking. Somewhere a compressor kicked on, the only thing in the building doing honest work. I memorized the sound. It would matter by morning. In the parking lot, winter air bit our teeth. Big Mike's shoulders were already squared toward the door. "We'll go quiet," he said. 2 minutes, lesson learned. He meant well. Men our age hate watching dignity bleed out in public. I put a hand on his chest. "You deck him. We give him a bigger story. Victim of a jealous has-been." Big Mike grunted, looked past me, saw the truth in it, and kicked a gravel rut instead. I told him about the little engine on my bench and the paper in Hank's desk that most folks didn't know existed. "You planning a sermon or a war?" he asked. "Both," I said. We stood there long enough for the cold to get personal. When I finally climbed into the Silverado, my hands were steady. The radio found an old song about a man keeping his powder dry. I smiled at that. There's an art to waiting. It's not passive. It's loading the right tools in the dark so you don't reach for the wrong one at dawn. We drove home mostly in the kind of silence that isn't empty. It's crowded with what you can't say yet. Streetlights slid across the dash like slow waves. At a red light, Linda checked her reflection in the visor mirror, dabbed at a smear of lipstick, and snapped it shut. "Rough night," she said. I answered, "For some." We pulled into the driveway. The porch light I promised to fix stayed dim and yellow. Inside, she toed off her heels and poured water like it was a truce. I thanked her, set it down untouched. The old mason jar of screws sat on the counter, lid off, like a clock that forgot its job. "You gonna brood or talk?" she asked. "I'll talk when it matters," I said. She shrugged, call it surrender, call it strategy, and her phone buzzed. She turned it face down. We brushed teeth like strangers sharing a motel. I lay awake, counting the slow tick of the bedroom fan. At 2 a.m., the house told the truth. Her phone lit the ceiling pale blue. I've never been the kind to snoop, but when a house is on fire, you don't ask the flames for permission. The preview was a full sentence, like arrogance forgot how locks work. "I covered the 50K under tire wear, just signed in the morning." My blood went cold before it boiled. This wasn't romance. It was theft with perfume. I didn't scroll. I didn't need to. A man my age has seen enough to know the shape of a snake even in tall grass. I stood at the window, watched the neighbor's flag move in a wind I couldn't feel, and listened to the refrigerator hum, faithful as ever. Sleep didn't come. Memory did. Hank's cough, the bell ring, Earl's steady hands, the claws no one discussed. I poured coffee at 4, the kind that tastes like resolve. By 5, I had a list in pencil and a phone in my hand. Dawn wasn't just coming. I was pulling it toward me. If you've been around long enough, you know trouble has a scent. Burnt rubber, hot brakes, cheap oil pretending to be brave. That text smelled like all three. Cover the 50K under tire wear wasn't just sloppy, it was a confession with a bow on it. I set the phone down like a loaded tool and opened my notebook, the cheap one with coffee rings and tire dust on the cover. I wrote names, dates, vendors, routes, who bought what, who suffered for it. I added a line I never wanted to write. Linda, signer. It hurt worse than a busted knuckle. Then I walked to the bench, lifted the little engine from its velvet bed, and wound it slow. The pistons moved like men breathing steady in a storm. "Tell me when," I whispered, and the house creaked like it agreed. Outside, the sky started to silver. Inside, I called the only man who answers on the first ring when the world tilts. "Mike," I said, "time for the hammer." Big Mike didn't ask questions that already had answers. "Copy," he said, voice quick and clear. We had practiced for emergencies, snow closures, labor shortages, hurricanes that turned freeways into rivers. We'd never named a plan for rot from the inside. Now we did. Hammer protocol wasn't violence. It was control. Keys collected, gates closed, trucks parked nose out for inspection, station heads on site, phones off speaker. Like older folks securing a house for a storm, you don't panic, you prep. Mike rattled names faster than I could nod. Beaumont, check. Odessa, check. Laredo, check. I texted 3 branch managers I trusted from the old days. Safety lock at dawn, my word. No one asked who gave me authority. They remembered. I printed the maintenance logs I had, highlighted the lies in yellow like caution tape, and slid the paper into a folder with a crisp $1 bill. The sun cracked the horizon, thin and mean. I grabbed my jacket. The Silverado coughed once, then settled into a faithful idle. We were moving. Before I hit the yard, I stopped at a bank where the carpet always smells like coffee and copier toner. The manager is a man with snowy hair who remembers when I opened a business account with a deposit that wouldn't buy a decent tire today. I asked him to notarize a copy of an old agreement. He read it slow, eyebrows climbing. "Rare clause," he said. "Rare men," I answered. He stamped, signed, and slid it back. I tucked it behind the dollar in the folder, closed the clasp, and felt something settle in my chest. Not revenge, alignment. Out in the lot, a kid scraped frost off a windshield with a loyalty card. I handed him a proper scraper from my truck. "Take care of your tools, they take care of you," I said. He grinned the way sons do when a father figure hands them something simple and true. I pulled onto the feeder road. The town was waking up. So were we. The bell in my head rang once, clear. The yard lights were still buzzing when I rolled in. Big Mike stood at the gate, clipboard and a thermos, chin lifted. Trucks lined up like soldiers with their boots polished, quiet but ready. Station heads checked VINs and tires, pockets full of keys, ours now, not theirs, until inspection said otherwise. A dispatcher jogged over, breath puffing white. "We've got loads due by 9, Jack." I nodded. "They'll leave safe or not at all." He looked past me, weighed the choice, and nodded too. A branch manager tried anger on for size. "You don't run this place." Big Mike stepped in, the way a wall steps in. "We run safety," he said. Men our age understand that line. Phones rang in the office like impatient birds. We let them. I parked by the dock, opened the folder, and felt the paper's weight. Linda's SUV swung into the lot fast, tires chirping. She stepped out in last night's dress and this morning's face. Even at 50 yards, I could see the moment she realized what day it was. Before I took the stairs to the office, I made one more call. Attorney Holloway picks up by the second ring and keeps his desk cleaner than a surgical tray. "It's time," I said. He didn't ask for what. He'd been braced like a linebacker for months, filing what could be filed, waiting on what couldn't. "Court's open at 9, he said. "I'll be there at 8. I slid the phone into my pocket and breathed. Not dramatic, the kind of breath a man takes before lifting something heavy he's lifted 100 times. Linda stopped 3 steps from me, eyes searching my face for an old softness. "Jack," she said. My name felt like a souvenir in her mouth. "We can talk," I offered, and meant it. Not to fix us, but to give truth its due. Behind her, Chad's BMW screamed into the lot, as subtle as a siren. Doors opened, voices rose. The bell above the bay door didn't ring, but I could hear it anyway. Curtain up. Time to work. By first light, Every yard sang the same quiet song, clinking key rings on metal tables. Station heads set coffee down, took a breath, and collected what mattered: ignitions, gate locks, fuel card boxes. Drivers lined up with calm faces and tired eyes, each handing over a small piece of power for a larger kind. I walked the Houston yard first. A rookie tried a nervous joke. An old-timer answered with a pat on the shoulder. We posted a simple sign on the bay door: safety inspection, no exceptions. Phones lit up like a slot machine, but we kept the cadence slow and steady. A woman from dispatch asked, "Jack, are we really stopping every truck?" I said, "We're stopping every lie." She nodded like someone who's carried a secret too long. Sun pushed through low clouds, turning chrome into little knives. Big Mike met me at the gate, a ledger under his arm. "Keys are ours," he said. "Then the truth is too," I answered, and the yard inhaled. Panic always starts smooth. Polite emails, quick questions, just clarifying. Then it grows teeth. By 6:10, HQ's line blinked nonstop. Clients wanted guarantees. Dispatchers wanted green lights. A branch in Laredo reported a supervisor pacing like a dad in a delivery room. "We've got perishables," he whined. "We've got drivers," I said. "They'll leave safe." In Beaumont, a young manager threatened overtime complaints. "Write them," I told him. "Use ink." The old hands steadied the rookies. "Breathe," Big Mike reminded a dispatcher, counting her inhales like he was teaching her to weld. In my pocket, the folder pressed against my thigh, warm now, like a heartbeat. A mechanic held up a tire gauge and mouthed, "Finally." The bell didn't ring, but we all heard it anyway. Panic tried to sprint. We made it walk. Someone asked if this would hurt the brand. I said the brand is the men. If we protect them, customers will understand. If we don't, nothing else matters. The phones kept screaming. We refused to. Every story has a man who thinks the rules are just suggestions. Ours marched out with a clipboard like it was a weapon. "You can't seize company property," he barked, pointing at the line of trucks like he owned their souls. Big Mike didn't puff up. He planted. "We're securing unsafe equipment," he said, voice low as a basement. The manager reached for his phone, thumb hovering over 911 like a threat. Mike shook his head once. "Don't call a cop to argue with gravity." A couple drivers stood wider, not menacing, just ready, like the ocean is ready. I stepped in. "You want to go on record denying an inspection?" He hesitated because paperwork makes brave men careful. "You'll jam the whole network," he tried. "We're unjamming it," I said, and meant every syllable. He lowered the phone. He wasn't beaten. He was taught. He stomped off, shoes loud on concrete that didn't care. Behind me, a forklift beeped a slow, steady metronome. We would move to that beat. I called Holloway from the dock ramp. He answered on the second ring, calm as Sunday. "I'm listening," he said. I gave him the short version. Locks, keys, memos, the text that said out loud what decent men hide by instinct. "Good," he answered. "Stay factual. If they shove, we hand the court a clean file." He reminded me how the clause reads: every comma a guardrail, mismanagement, material risk, right to reclaim, not revenge, responsibility. He was already in motion, filings prepped, notary lined up again, affidavits with room for signatures that had stories behind them. "Be where people can see you," he added. "Older folks know this one. If you stand in the light, shadows shrink." I tucked the phone away and let the dockwood crease under my boots. Big Mike passed me a stack of inspection tags. "Green for go, red for ground," he said. We were building a picture a judge could understand without touching a wrench. Law and bolts, side by side. I could live with that. Linda swept through the glass doors like a headline. Hair too perfect for morning, dress built for dim lights, not daylight. She found me by feel, wives always do, and started with logistics. "We have premium clients screaming," she said, as if volume turned lies into truth. I looked at her hands instead of her eyes. No ring. She must have left it by the sink again. "We're running inspections," I answered, even, not cruel. She pitched the company line, reputation, growth, the app. I let her say it all because sometimes you give a person enough rope to measure how far they've drifted. "We're covered," she added, and the word covered tasted like that text. I didn't ask about it. Not here, not yet. She noticed the folder. What's that? Wait, I said. She almost smiled. You always did love paper. Not this kind. Big Mike walked up, gave her a nod that was more boundary than greeting. We left it there, 3 people at a crossroads, none taking a step. Chad arrived the way thunder arrives, late, loud, certain it's the main event. The BMW skidded into a space crooked enough to tell on him. He wore anger like cologne. Who authorized this? He shouted, pointing at the neat row of parked rigs like they'd insulted his tie. I held up a hand, palm down. Lower your voice, I said. He raised it. That's how boys test fences. Release the keys or I swear. He didn't finish. Not because we cut him off, but because the yard did. Men stopped what they were doing and looked up with one face. It wasn't mutiny. It was memory. He tried the manager tone again. This is a business, not a clubhouse. Big Mike snorted. Funny. I thought it was a lifeline. Chad stepped closer than the truth allows and jabbed a finger at my chest. You're done here. I looked at the folder. Let's find out, I said. Somewhere behind us, the bell finally rang. Only once, but it was enough. I didn't plan the drift. The lot just opened and the truck knew the steps. The Silverado slid a clean crescent and kissed the parking line like a signature. I climbed out in work clothes that smelled like the life he mocked, and the yard took a breath. Not applause. Alignment. Old drivers straightened. New ones stood taller. I wasn't a savior. I was a mirror, showing them who they'd been before comfort softened the edges. Chad tried to smirk and found he'd misplaced it. You think theatrics make you right? He jeered. I shook my head. Paper does. I lifted the folder like a small, patient hammer. He laughed too quickly. What paper? The kind your father read carefully, I said, and something in his cheek twitched. Men my age saw it, the first crease of fear on a young face. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of rubber and risk. I tapped the hood of the Silverado twice, the way you thank an old friend. Let's go inside, I said. You'll want a chair. At the bay door, Big Mike held it open like a deacon with a hymnal. As I passed, a driver I didn't recognize, maybe 25, freckles dusted across his nose, said, Morning, boss. The word hit me harder than I expected. Not pride, permission. We filed into the conference area that doubles as a break room. Stale donuts, strong coffee, posters about safety curling at the corners. I took the spot by the whiteboard because that's where a teacher stands when the room needs learning. Chad dragged a chair like he wanted the floor to hurt. Linda lingered near the doorway, unsure which tide to swim with. I set the folder on the table and kept a palm on it like a Bible. We're going to talk plain, I said. Tires, money, promises. Heads nodded. A tech with grease under his nails folded his arms and steadied. You can feel a room lean into integrity like a truck leaning into a grade. I opened the clasp. The paper sighed. So did Chad. The clause isn't poetry, it's plumbing. But to a man drowning, a pipe is a song. I slid the notarized copy across to Chad. He read the title, then the line that mattered. Upon mismanagement or endangerment, the right to buy back all shares for $1. His eyes ran to the margins, searching for a trapdoor. There wasn't one. The notary stamp glinted like a badge. Big Hank's signature lay steady, like a hand on a shoulder. This is fake, he tried. Holloway's name appeared in the header. It's filed, I said. We're not debating. We're notifying. The room didn't clap. It exhaled. Linda touched the table and pulled her hand back like she'd felt heat. Chad swallowed, the sound loud in the quiet. He tried to laugh, then couldn't find the air. He finally sat, which was smarter than his words. I placed a crisp $1 on the paper. Symbol, not payment, I said. Older men smiled without mouths. The weight had shifted. You could feel it in the floor. Chad's color drained, then rushed back angry. You can't just take it, he hissed. I built... The room's silence answered that lie. I turned the page and pointed to purchase orders. Retreads billed as premium, fuel cards for people who don't work here, engines replaced in trucks already totaled, and here... I slid a contract forward, finger resting beside a familiar loop in blue ink. Is the signature that turns carelessness into crime. Linda stared at her name like she was meeting a stranger. The room didn't judge. It waited. Jack, she started, then stopped. Holloway's voice came through the speakerphone, steady, not cruel. Mr. Thorne, you are relieved of authority pending court order. Ms. Walker, you may wish to secure counsel. Outside, I heard the yard, diesel idling, a socket gun, men moving with purpose again. Inside, Chad's chair scraped as he stood too fast. This isn't over, he spat. I nodded. Correct. It's finally beginning. And somewhere, in memory or faith, Hank rang that bell again. I took the yard outside where truth can't hide behind a conference table. Pull that tire, I said. Crowbars bit rubber. A tech named Rosie, 40 years old, wrists like rope, worked the bead while Big Mike steadied the rim. Men formed a half circle, hats low, breath fogging. We weren't putting on a show, we were performing an autopsy. The first slice sounded like a zipper on a heavy coat. Layers should have gleamed with new steel cords. Instead, we saw patchwork, crumb rubber, sloppy splices, scars pretending to be structure. I held the cross-section up so sunlight could judge it too. Someone swore under his breath, not crude, prayerful. Premium, huh? I said, and laid the scrap on a clean towel like evidence in a courthouse. I pointed to the inspection line. Every truck, every tire. The crew moved as one, sockets chattering, jacks lifting. We'd all seen bad tires. We hadn't seen them sold to us like a promise. The manager from earlier swallowed hard. Good, swallow the truth. It only gets bigger. The second tire split easier than the first, like lies do once the first one breaks. A younger tech named Jay slid a magnet along the cut and fished out a bent staple where a steel cord should have been. He held it up, insulted. I spread the purchase order on a pallet, Michelin, top tier, full price, then tapped the garbage in my hand. This is what arrived. A murmur rolled through the crowd, a wave hitting pilings. Folks our age know that sound from town halls and union meetings. It's the sound of patience running out. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. You don't gamble with a man's life to make a spreadsheet prettier. Near the back, a dispatcher wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and set her jaw. I looked to the camera we'd set on a tripod. Document everything, I told the kid running it. Someday a judge will need to see what honesty looks like. He nodded, red light steady. Then I turned to the table of contracts. Paper can feel heavier than steel when it carries what it carries. I laid out the vendor contracts like a map of a bad road. Line items matched our nightmares. Premium prices, bogus specs, delivery dates that moved like mirages. And then the signature. Blue ink, the loop I could pick out of a lineup. Linda's name. My throat went dry, same as when a brake line hisses on a hill. These are executed by our sales director, I said, steady. I didn't look at her. I owed the room focus more than I owed us comfort. Men shifted their weight. An older driver muttered, "We trusted you." Not at me, at the paper. Linda's chin trembled, then held. I signed what accounting cleared, she said, too fast. I tapped the vendor's routing number with a pen. Accounting didn't clear this. Greed did. The yard went quiet enough to hear gulls from the drainage ditch. I slid my phone to the center of the pallet. Before you answer again, I said, listen. I hit play. The yard heard everything, the soft laugh, the smug math. If we log it as 2 million and buy for 1, the spread is clean, Chad's voice said. And I'll finally get that Hermes bag, Linda answered, light as a commercial. A nail gun popped in a distant bay like a judge's gavel. No one looked at me. They didn't need to. They stared at the phone like it was a snake. Linda pressed her lips together until the color drained. That's out of context, she tried. Older ears don't need context to recognize intent. The audio went on. Delivery schedules, who to blame if a tire failed, the exact words operator error spoken like a plan. I stopped it there. That's enough. A driver in his 60s shook his head the way a man does at a funeral when he runs out of tears. I pocketed the phone. We don't do trials in parking lots, I said, but we do tell the truth where men can hear it. Then Earl stepped forward. Earl's right arm was wrapped tight, white gauze peeking from under his flannel. He doesn't like microphones or spotlights. He likes steady lanes and full tanks. He cleared his throat, and 100 men leaned in. I did everything by the book, he said. Checked pressure, kept it under the limit. I ain't perfect, but I ain't careless. His wife stood near the gate, holding a thermos, eyes shiny. When that tire went, it wasn't a wobble. It was a slap from God, he said, voice catching. If there'd been a minivan beside me, I'd have taken him with me. The crowd exhaled all at once. Earl reached into his pocket, pulled out a strip of rubber he'd kept like a scar, and laid it next to the contracts without touching them. I brought evidence, he said, and the smallest smile twitched at one corner. Gallows humor for men who work around heavy things. He looked at me. Do what you gotta do, Jack. I nodded. I already was. The yard answered for us. Anger didn't explode. It cracked and spread. A tech tossed a retread label like it burned. A dispatcher said, "My brother runs nights on those," voice shaking. Someone near the back shouted, "Pay him back his hospital bills." Another added, "Pay back our faith." I raised both hands the way you quiet a choir, not to control them, but to make space. "You'll get what you're owed," I said, "in money and in respect." A foreman slammed his palm on the pallet. "And in parts," he added. Heads nodded. We older folks know the order of things. First safety, then dignity, then dollars. Linda looked small and far away, like a person in a rearview mirror you're leaving behind. Chad reached for bravado and found lint. He whispered into his phone, trying names like lifelines. The yard didn't boo. It did worse. It judged. Judgment isn't loud. It's heavy. The wind picked up, riffling the contracts. I pinned them with the dollar from my pocket. A symbol needs weight. So does a promise. We were adding both. Linda snapped. "You set me up," she spat, eyes hard with the kind of fear that bites. "You recorded private conversations, coward!" I didn't step back. I didn't step forward. Big Mike did, not to intimidate, but to stand between heat and tinder. "Ma'am," he said, voice like a steel cable, "you're surrounded by men who'd take a tire for your husband. Don't swing at the ones holding the jack." She trembled, then lunged, hand raised like a question with no good answer. Mike caught her wrist softly, held it like you hold a broken thing so it won't break more. "Enough," I said, not to shame her, but to tell the moment it had reached its end. She sagged, a person realizing their own weight. A driver placed a water bottle on the pallet near her, label turned away, dignity offered. She didn't take it. Somewhere a truck coughed to life and then cut off, as if even engines knew to wait. I looked at Chad. He was already dialing. Chad paced like a man searching for a door in a room with none. "Rick, it's me. I need a line of credit. Today." Pause. His face fell the way ceilings do. "No, I still control—" He stopped, listened, swallowed. Next call. "Carla, it's Chad. Favor time." Another no, softer but the same shape. He tried a third, name-dropping like keys on a ring. "You own nothing," I heard faintly through the speaker. That sentence lands different when it's true. He jabbed at the screen again, thumb frantic. Men my age watched with a calm that isn't cruel. It's earned. We've seen storms. We've seen fair-weather friends sprint for cover. Linda sat on a curb, eyes glassy, lipstick a smear of last night's confidence. I stepped closer, not to gloat, but to make the next part clear. "You both deserve due process," I said, "and you'll get it, but so will the truth." Chad laughed without humor. "You think this yard saves you?" "No," I said. "This yard saves itself." I don't like calling the law on anyone. Men of our generation were raised to handle what we can with our own hands. But there's a line between hard and wrong, and they'd crossed it twice. I dialed Sheriff Daniels. He answered with my name and no small talk, which tells you everything. I stated facts like lug torque, retreads sold as premium, falsified POs, audio evidence, an accident with a near fatal. "You detaining anyone?" he asked. "No," I said. "We're holding keys, not people." He grunted approval. "Units en route." I hung up and addressed the yard. "No one lay a hand on anyone," I said. "We don't dirty a clean case." Heads bowed like a prayer. Earl's wife finally brought him the thermos. He took a sip and let his shoulders drop an inch. The wind shifted cooler, honest air after a storm front. From the road, distant sirens threaded through traffic like sewing needles. Chad stood up straighter, the way men do when they run out of places to hide. The cruisers rolled in without drama, blue lights spinning quiet, doors opening smooth. Deputies moved like men who've learned to see before they speak. I met the lead at the pallet. He eyed the cut tires, the contracts weighted by a single dollar, the circle of workers not advancing, not retreating. "Morning, Jack," he said, pen ready. I gave him the short version and the paper. He nodded slow, then turned to Chad. "Sir, you're being detained pending investigation into commercial fraud and reckless endangerment." The cuff click is small, but it echoes. Chad tried to pull his wrist away and found reality has a grip. Linda stood when they approached, pride searching for a route and finding a dead end. "Ma'am," the deputy said, careful, "we'll need you to come in for questioning." She looked at me like a person at a dock watching a ship leave. I didn't wave. The yard stayed still, respectful as a funeral, grateful as a christening. When the doors shut, a hush followed. Then I rang the bell. Once. The cruiser door shut on Chad with a soft thud that sounded bigger than it was. He tried to stare me down through the glass, but reflections, blue lights, steel beams, his own face, got in the way. Older folks know that look, a man meeting himself for the first time. Deputies did their work clean, no chest puffing, no extra words. I signed a witness statement with a pen that felt heavier than it should. The yard didn't cheer, it breathed. Earl's wife squeezed his good hand. A tech picked up the stapled contracts and slid them back into the folder like a flag folded right. I told Big Mike to release the first green-tagged units, safe loads only. Engines fired in order, like a choir that had found its note. As the cruisers eased out, the bell above the bay door rang twice on a gust. Habit, maybe, or a reminder. Either way, the sound carried. We'd been waiting for permission to get back to work. It arrived in handcuffs. Time to move. Linda stood very still, as if stillness could freeze a bad moment and make it reconsider. The deputy approached with calm steps and careful eyes. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us." Her chin lifted the way a proud person's does right before they fall. I only signed," she started, but the sentence broke like thin ice. He offered his hands first, not the cuffs, giving dignity one last chance to choose itself. She didn't take it. The metal touched her wrist, and something in me flinched. History, habit, the echo of a younger U.S. counting coins and grinning anyway. I nodded to the deputy because right is still right when it hurts. As she passed, she looked at the little engine on the table, this time really seeing it. "You kept building," she said, almost to herself. "Always," I answered. The door closed behind her. The yard didn't gloat. It got quieter, like a church after a hymn. Mercy and consequence can stand in the same room. Today, they did. Holloway arrived with a folder neat as a judge's desk, buyback filings on top, divorce papers beneath. We stepped into the small office by the dock where I once taught a kid to tie his first strap. The blinds rattled in a steady wind. "Prenup holds," he said. "Infidelity clause, plus the fraud charges. You'll keep the house and the company shares. She keeps her personal items." I initialed where the tabs asked me to, each stroke a memory closing gently, not slammed. I'm not proud and not ashamed, just certain. Linda and I were a story with good chapters and a hard ending. Older folks understand this. You can honor the past without living there. When the last signature met the last line, Holloway slid a copy across and set the pen down between us like a truce. "You okay?" he asked. "I will be," I said, and meant it. Out in the yard, a truck horn gave 2 quick notes, the old signal we used for all clear. It fit. We didn't throw a party. We made coffee. The break room filled until men stood shoulder to shoulder. Grease and cologne and relief stirred into the same air. Big Mike tapped a mug with a socket extension. "Listen up," he said, then looked to me. I kept it plain. "You kept this place honest when it got hard. I saw it. I won't forget it." Someone shouted, "Ring the bell!" And for once it wasn't for a delivery. It was for dignity. I pulled the rope and let the brass speak. The sound rolled through bays and bone. Guys grinned like Little League champions and veterans both, which some of them were. We passed a clipboard for ideas, routes to fix, vendors to vet, parts we trust. A rookie suggested a mentorship board. An old-timer wrote, "Friday chili again?" And the room laughed, because chili is culture and culture keeps trucks between the lines. When the bell quieted, the silence felt different. Not fearful. Full. Like a field after rain. Ready. I gathered supervisors and posted a sheet to the corkboard. Immediate actions. First line. Back pay X3 for any delayed bonuses or hours shorted in the last 6 months. No forms, no pleading. Accounting groaned. I reminded them what it costs to buy back trust if you don't pay it forward. Second line. Brotherhood fund. Restored. Medical bills, funerals, rent when a guy's wife loses her job, braces for a kid whose smile needs a hand. No man in this yard stands alone. Third line. Parts and tires. Premium only. If the margin shrinks, so be it. A margin never called you at 2 a.m. to say thanks for getting Dad home safe. The crew didn't clap. They nodded. Older men, younger men, different faiths, same road. Earl squeezed my shoulder. "You didn't have to," he said. "I did," I told him. "Because someone once did it for me." Outside, the first green tag convoys rolled out smooth, trailers straight, straps singing. The bell didn't ring this time. It didn't have to. The road answered. We met Earl and his wife at the kitchen table where families do math that never adds up. Bills on one side, hope on the other. I slid a folder across. Hospital paid, therapy covered, mileage too. And your oldest? Scholarship, books, tools, the whole shot. When he finishes, there's a desk waiting in our shop if he wants it. Earl blinked like a man stepping into daylight. His wife pressed a napkin to her eyes and laughed through it. Older folks know that laugh, the one that sounds like a knot coming loose. We didn't make a speech. We signed forms, we hugged, we ate store-bought pie on paper plates because Grace doesn't check the brand. On my way out, I noticed a shoebox ledger near the microwave. I kept one just like it once. "Keep it," I said, tapping the lid, "but add a line for good breaks." Earl smiled, small and true. When I started the truck, he stood on the porch and lifted his coffee like a salute. I lifted mine back. The first month felt like turning a rusted bolt, slow, stubborn, then blessedly smooth. We swapped every suspect tire, changed oil like religion, and rewrote vendor lists with pens that didn't shake. Word traveled. A national shipper out of Kansas called, then another out of Georgia. They didn't ask for our app, they asked for our promise. We signed 2 big contracts and 1 bigger handshake, the kind you feel in your shoulder blades. DOT checks started reading clean. Drivers started ringing the bell again, not out of habit, but out of pride. I walked the yard and watched a rookie shadow an old-timer, learning how to hear a bearing before it sings the wrong song. Paychecks hit right, on time, no mystery deductions. The break room bulletin got crowded with baby photos, fishing pics, and the return of Friday chili. I slept better, still light, but better. At dawn, I stood by the bay and listened. Engines at idle, low and even. That's what recovery sounds like. It sounds like trust. Hilton's cafeteria smelled like coffee that's been on since 5 and bacon that forgives the clock. Drivers in ball caps traded stories in a language only mile markers truly understand. Behind the counter, Linda wore a hairnet and a tired smile, hands moving faster than her eyes. She saw me and didn't. Then she did. Pride tried to stand up in her posture, stumbled, and sat back down. I didn't come to gloat. I came to finish a sentence that started a long time ago. I ordered eggs and toast because those are the foods that don't lie. She slid the plate across, careful not to touch my fingers, and said, "How's the yard?" "Honest," I answered. "Busy." She nodded, and in that nod was the ghost of a kitchen we once shared, counting change and laughing anyway. A driver 2 stools down asked me about tire brands. I answered like I always do, plain. When I stood to leave, the room felt like a church foyer, warm, awkward, human. I took out my wallet. I pulled a single dollar, crisp, the one I'd carried since Big Hank's office, set it in the tip jar, and let it lean there like a tiny flag. No flourish, no speech. Symbols don't need narration. Linda watched it land. Her chin trembled once, then steadied. "You always liked your little rituals," she said, trying for light. They keep men between the lines, I answered. A driver held the door for me, nodding the way men nod when words would get in the way. Outside, the Kenworth W900 waited, long hood, square shoulders, chrome that catches sunrise without bragging. I climbed in and let the big engine settle into that deep, honest idle. Through the glass, I saw Linda pick up the dollar, turn it over, and press it flat beside the register. Maybe she understood. Maybe she just counted it. Either way, the math worked this time. I eased onto the feeder road, gears smooth, trailer straight. In the mirror, the hotel shrank. In the cab, the future didn't. The road welcomed me back, welcomed me. Sun sat low over Houston as I took the W900 onto the open lane. Light washed across calloused hands, same hands that turned wrenches, built a V8 on a bench, and rang a bell when men did right. Earl's kids, the Brotherhood Fund, the inspections, the parts, none of it feels heroic. It feels like alignment. Hank's dollar rides in my wallet, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that stewardship beats swagger every mile. The road forgives mistakes. It does not forgive lies. I set the cruise just under fast, let the engine hum like a prayer, and watched the city fall behind in the mirrors. Somewhere a radio played an old song about coming home. I said our rule out loud, for me and any man who needed to hear it. Rules are rules. Respect the road or get run over. If this story met you where you live, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there.